The morning crowds at New Terra's Central Market moved with the practiced efficiency of people who had places to be and credits to spend. Vendors called out their wares in a dozen different languages while shoppers haggled over prices for everything from fresh produce to imported delicacies from across the sector. The air thrummed with commercial energy, the scent of exotic spices mixing with engine exhaust from the transport pods that delivered goods from the spaceport. Kira pressed herself against the side wall of Hendrik's produce stand, trying to make herself invisible while the human vendor finished serving his morning rush of customers. Her stomach cramped with familiar hunger, a constant companion since arriving on this world 6 weeks ago with nothing but the clothes she wore. The crystalline patterns along her silver skin had dulled from malnutrition, and her pointed ears drooped with exhaustion that went beyond mere physical fatigue. She waited until Hendrix turned his back to serve another customer before darting toward the refuse bins behind his stall. Yesterday's discarded vegetables might still have edible portions, and she'd learned to be grateful for even the smallest morsels. Her fingers worked quickly through the garbage, separating potentially useful scraps from the completely spoiled waste. "Hey! Get away from there, you filthy scavenger!" Kira froze as Hendrik's voice cut through the market noise. She looked up to find the vendor glaring at her with the kind of disgust usually reserved for vermin. Several other customers had stopped to stare, their expressions ranging from pity to annoyance. "I am sorry," she said carefully, her accented standard betraying her alien origins. "I was only looking for food that you no longer need." "I don't need alien diseases contaminating my business," Hendrix replied, moving toward her with aggressive intent. "Find somewhere else to dig through garbage." Kira backed away from the bins, her hands raised in a gesture of non-confrontation that her people used to signal peaceful intentions. Unfortunately, humans didn't recognize the cultural significance, and several onlookers interpreted her movement as suspicious. "Please, I have not eaten in 2 days," she said, hating the way her voice cracked with desperation. "I take only what you throw away." "What you take is customers who don't want to shop where aliens root through the trash," Hendrix snapped. "Security." The market security guards were already approaching, their hands resting casually on shock batons that could drop an adult Ilari in seconds. Kira had experienced their efficiency before and had no desire to spend another night in the detention cells. She turned to flee and nearly collided with a human woman carrying a basket of fresh ingredients. The woman was small and compact, with graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and the kind of efficient movements that spoke of long experience in commercial kitchens. "Excuse me," Kira mumbled, trying to step around the obstacle. "Wait," the woman said, her tone sharp enough to cut through Kira's panic. She turned to face Hendrix with the kind of authority that made the vendor hesitate. "What exactly is the problem here?" "This alien has been harassing my customers and contaminating my merchandise," Hendrix replied, though his bluster seemed less certain when faced with someone who clearly wasn't intimidated by his posturing. "By looking through your garbage?" the woman asked, her eyebrows rising in apparent disbelief. "The garbage that you were throwing away anyway?" "Elena, this isn't your concern," Hendrix said, apparently recognizing the woman. "I run a legitimate business here." "So do I, Frank," Elena replied coolly. "Which is why I shop here regularly and know exactly what you throw away. Half of these vegetables would be perfectly edible if you bothered to trim them properly instead of discarding anything with minor blemishes." Kira watched this exchange with growing confusion. Humans rarely defended Ilari refugees, especially not against established business owners. She prepared to run again, assuming this was merely a delay before the inevitable ejection from the market. "Look," Hendrix said, his voice rising with frustration, "I can't have vagrants digging through my trash. It's bad for business." "Then maybe you should consider wasting less food," Elena suggested. She turned to look at Kira directly, her brown eyes showing curiosity rather than disgust. "When did you last have a proper meal?" The question caught Kira off guard. 2 days ago. A vendor gave me half a sandwich that had fallen on the ground." Elena's expression tightened with what might have been anger. "Frank, you should be ashamed of yourself. This woman is clearly hungry," and you're worried about your image? She's not my responsibility, Hendricks replied defensively. There are refugee services for her kind. Her kind? Elena's voice dropped to a temperature that could freeze stellar plasma. You mean people who lost everything through no fault of their own and are trying to survive with dignity intact? Before Hendricks could respond, Elena reached into her basket and pulled out a small container of prepared soup. She handed it to Kira along with a disposable spoon, ignoring the startled reactions from the gathered crowd. This is fresh, she said simply. Made it this morning for my lunch, but I think you need it more than I do. Kira stared at the container as if it might be a hallucination brought on by hunger. The soup smelled incredible. Rich broth with herbs she recognized from her homeworld mixed with unfamiliar human spices that created an intriguing aromatic complexity. I cannot pay you, she said quietly. I didn't ask you to, Elena replied. Eat. The first spoonful hit Kira's system like a revelation. The broth was perfectly balanced, with layers of flavor that revealed themselves gradually as she tasted. More than that, she could sense the care and skill that had gone into its preparation. Whoever had made this soup understood food not just as fuel but as comfort, as art, as a form of communication between souls. You made this yourself, Kira said, looking up at Elena with something approaching awe. I'm a chef, Elena confirmed. I own a restaurant a few blocks from here. This is beautiful, Kira whispered, taking another careful spoonful. The harmony of flavors, the way the spices support rather than dominate the base ingredients, you have great skill. Elena's eyebrows rose slightly. You know something about cooking? On my world, food preparation was considered a sacred art, Kira replied, then caught herself. Speaking about Ilari culture often made humans uncomfortable, reminding them that refugees came from somewhere, that they had lost entire civilizations in their flight to human space. But Elena just nodded thoughtfully. What was your specialty? Emotional cuisine, Kira said, then realized how strange that must sound. We believe that food should nourish not just the body but the spirit. Different combinations of ingredients and preparation methods could enhance mood, promote healing, encourage contemplation. Interesting, Elena mused. I've never heard of anything quite like that. The crowd around them had begun to disperse, losing interest now that the confrontation was over. Hendricks retreated to his stall with obvious displeasure, muttering about bleeding hearts and business interference. The security guards moved on to other concerns, leaving Kira and Elena alone beside the produce bins. Look, Elena said, making what was clearly an impulsive decision, I was about to head back to my restaurant to prep for lunch service. Why don't you come with me? You can finish that soup properly, and maybe tell me more about this emotional cuisine concept. Kira blinked in surprise. You wish me to come to your establishment? I wish you to come have a decent meal while we talk, Elena corrected. Consider it payment for consulting on culinary theory. It wasn't charity, Kira realized. Elena was offering her something more valuable than food, she was offering respect, treating her as someone with knowledge worth sharing rather than just another refugee to be pitied or ignored. I would be honored, Kira said, finishing the last of the soup and carefully cleaning the container before handing it back. Thank you for your kindness. Thank you for not letting me walk past while someone treated you like garbage, Elena replied. Come on, let's get you fed properly. As they walked through the market toward Elena's restaurant, Kira felt something she hadn't experienced since leaving her homeworld, hope. Not just for her next meal, but for the possibility that somewhere in this vast galaxy of strangers, she might find a place where her skills and knowledge were valued rather than feared. It was a fragile hope, as delicate as the crystalline patterns on her skin, but it was enough to keep her walking toward whatever came next. Stellar Fusion occupied a modest corner space in New Terra's Arts District, its welcoming exterior painted in warm earth tones that seemed to invite passers-by inside. Through the wide windows, Kira could see mismatched furniture that somehow created a cohesive atmosphere of comfortable eclecticism. The lunch crowd was beginning to arrive, humans, mostly, but she spotted at least 3 other alien species among the diners. "It's not much to look at," Elena said, following Kira's gaze, "but the food is honest and the prices are fair. That goes a long way in this neighborhood." Inside, the restaurant buzzed with the comfortable energy of a well-run establishment. Staff moved efficiently between tables while the open kitchen design allowed diners to watch their meals being prepared. The air carried a symphony of aromas that made Kira's enhanced senses practically sing with appreciation. "Elena's back," called a young human man from behind the counter. "How'd the market run go?" "Productive," Elena replied, guiding Kira to a small table near the kitchen. "Tommy, this is Kira. She's going to join us for lunch and maybe share some insights about cooking techniques." Tommy looked curious but not suspicious, which Kira appreciated. Too many humans treated unknown aliens as potential threats until proven otherwise. "Cool. You want the usual table?" "Perfect. And bring us the daily special, 2 portions." As Tommy hurried away, Elena settled into her chair and studied Kira with professional interest. "So tell me about emotional cuisine. How exactly does food affect mood beyond the obvious comfort aspects?" Kira took a moment to organize her thoughts, trying to translate concepts that didn't have direct equivalents in human culture. "On Ilaris, we understood that different combinations of nutrients, flavors, and even preparation methods could influence neurochemical responses. What you call comfort food is a simple example. Certain dishes trigger memories and associations that produce emotional responses. But you took it further than that. Much further. We studied how mineral content affects cognitive function, how specific herb combinations could reduce anxiety or enhance creativity. The preparation process itself was important. Food prepared with anger or frustration would carry those emotions to the consumer." Tommy returned with 2 steaming plates that immediately captured Kira's attention. The dish appeared to be some form of pasta with a cream-based sauce, but the presentation showed an artistic eye that elevated it beyond simple sustenance. Garnishes were placed with deliberate precision, colors balanced to please the eye as well as the palate. Kira took her first bite and froze, her enhanced senses processing layers of information that human taste buds would miss entirely. The chef, Elena, she realized, had been feeling confident but slightly melancholy while cooking. There were traces of nostalgia in the sauce preparation, probably memories triggered by familiar ingredients. "This is remarkable," she said, setting down her fork with something approaching reverence. "The flavor balance is exquisite, but more than that, you were thinking of home when you made this sauce, weren't you?" Elena's eyes widened. "How could you possibly know that?" "Ilari have more sensitive taste receptors than humans," Kira explained. "I can detect subtle chemical variations that reflect the cook's emotional state during preparation. This dish carries traces of homesickness, not unpleasant, but wistful." "My grandmother's recipe," Elena admitted. "I was thinking about her kitchen while I was cooking. She died last year, and sometimes making her dishes helps me feel connected to her memory." "Food as emotional bridge," Kira nodded. "We would call this memory cuisine, dishes that carry the essence of relationships and experiences." Their conversation was interrupted by a crash from the kitchen, followed by Tommy's voice calling for help. Elena jumped up immediately, her restaurant owner instincts kicking in. "Stay here," she told Kira. "Finish your lunch." But Kira could hear the chaos building in the kitchen. Apparently their prep cook had called in sick, leaving them short-handed during the lunch rush. Elena's voice rose above the noise, trying to coordinate multiple orders while handling cooking duties herself. After a few minutes of listening to the mounting stress levels, Kira made a decision that would have horrified her just hours earlier. She stood up and walked into the kitchen. "May I help?" she asked Elena, who was simultaneously managing 3 different pans while shouting instructions to Tommy about order timing. "You don't understand," Elena replied without looking up, "this is controlled chaos. I can't have customers in the—" "I am not a customer," Kira interrupted gently. "I am someone who understands food preparation and can see that you need assistance. Elena glanced at her, sweat beading on her forehead as she juggled multiple time-sensitive tasks. Do you have any experience with human cooking equipment? No, Kira admitted, but I learn quickly, and I can follow directions precisely. It was either desperation or intuition that made Elena nod toward the prep station. Wash your hands, thoroughly, and start chopping those vegetables. Small dice, uniform size. What followed was unlike anything Kira had experienced since leaving her homeworld. The frantic energy of professional cooking, the precise coordination required to produce multiple complex dishes simultaneously, the satisfaction of seeing individual ingredients transform into something greater than their component parts, it all combined to create a sensation she had almost forgotten. She was useful again. She had purpose. Her knife work proved to be exceptional, drawing impressed comments from Tommy as she produced perfectly uniform vegetable cuts with remarkable speed. Her enhanced senses allowed her to judge doneness by sound and smell alone, calling out timing alerts that helped Elena coordinate the complex dance of the lunch service. Behind you, hot pan coming through, Elena called, carrying a sizzling skillet past Kira's station. Order up, table 12, Tommy announced, sliding plates across the pass. Kira, can you taste this sauce and tell me if it needs more salt? It was exactly like the kitchens of her homeworld, except faster and louder and somehow more intense. By the time the lunch rush ended, Kira's clothes were stained with various sauces and her crystalline skin patterns were glowing with the kind of energy she hadn't felt in months. That was incredible, Elena said, leaning against the prep counter with exhaustion and satisfaction. I've never seen knife skills like that, and your sense of timing is extraordinary. It felt wonderful to be useful again, Kira admitted. I had forgotten how much I missed working with food. Elena studied her thoughtfully. Kira, I need to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. Kira tensed, wondering if she had somehow offended or made a mistake during the service. How would you feel about doing this regularly? Elena continued. I mean, working here as part of my kitchen staff. The pay isn't great, and the hours can be brutal, but you clearly have talent that's being wasted. Kira stared at her, not quite believing what she was hearing. You are offering me employment. I'm offering you a job, Elena confirmed. Not charity, not pity, a job. You proved yourself today, and frankly, I could use someone with your skills and instincts. For a moment, Kira couldn't speak. Employment meant legitimacy, meant the possibility of building something resembling a normal life. It meant dignity and purpose and the chance to use abilities she had feared were forever lost. I accept, she said simply, then added with traditional Ilari formality, I pledge my skills and loyalty to your kitchen, Chef Elena. Elena smiled, extending her hand in the human gesture of agreement. Welcome to Stellar Fusion, Kira. I think this is going to be the beginning of something very interesting. As they shook hands, Kira felt the last of her despair finally beginning to lift. She had found more than just a job, she had found a chance to rebuild her life, one dish at a time. 3 weeks into her employment at Stellar Fusion, Kira had transformed from desperate refugee to invaluable team member. Her unique abilities allowed her to detect food spoilage before any human nose could notice, prevent overcooking through precise auditory cues, and create flavor combinations that shouldn't work but somehow achieved perfect harmony. The restaurant's reputation had begun to spread through New Terra's dining community, with repeat customers specifically requesting the special dishes. Table 15 wants to know if we can make something to help with anxiety, Tommy reported during the dinner prep period. Says his wife heard we do therapeutic cooking now. Elena looked up from her sauce preparation with amusement. We don't advertise therapeutic cooking. But we do it, Kira pointed out from her station, where she was carefully arranging garnishes with artistic precision. Yesterday's lavender-infused soup for the grieving widower, the iron-rich stir-fry for the pregnant woman who was feeling depleted, the comfort pasta for the homesick student. You're right, Elena admitted. I hadn't thought of it that way, but we have been doing a lot of mood-based menu adjustments lately. It is what food should do, Kira said simply. Nourish the whole person, not just the body. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Marcus Webb, a food critic for the Colony Daily whose reviews could make or break restaurants in the territory. Elena had been dreading this visit for days, knowing that Stellar Fusion's eclectic style didn't fit neatly into the categories that critics usually preferred. "Ms. Vasquez," Webb said with professional courtesy, "I'm here for my reservation. I trust you'll provide your usual service without any special considerations for my presence." "Of course," Elena replied smoothly, though Kira could sense her elevated stress levels from across the kitchen. "Tommy will seat you at your preferred table." As Webb was escorted to his dining area, Elena began second-guessing every dish on the evening's menu. Her anxiety was affecting her cooking. Kira could taste the uncertainty creeping into the sauces, the hesitation that would translate to muddled flavors. "Chef," Kira said quietly, moving to Elena's side, "may I suggest something?" "What?" "Let me prepare his meal. My senses can tell exactly what he needs, not just what he wants, but what will make him feel most satisfied and receptive." Elena hesitated. Having an alien refugee cook for the most influential food critic in the sector seemed like professional suicide. On the other hand, Kira's instincts had been flawless so far. "What would you make?" Kira closed her eyes, extending her enhanced senses toward the dining room. "He is stressed, probably from a difficult day. His body chemistry suggests he skipped lunch and has been consuming too much caffeine. He needs something that will ground him, make him feel nourished and cared for without being obvious about it." She moved to the ingredient storage with decisive purpose. Braised short ribs with root vegetables and herbs that promote calmness. A simple preparation that speaks to basic human comfort needs, but executed with technical precision that will demonstrate our skills. Elena watched as Kira began her preparation with the kind of meditative focus that made cooking look like a spiritual practice. Every movement was deliberate, every ingredient added with careful consideration of its contribution to both flavor and emotional impact. "The meat was raised by farmers who cared about their animals," Kira murmured as she worked. "I can taste the difference, no stress hormones, no fear. The vegetables were harvested at peak ripeness by people who take pride in their work. These are ingredients that carry positive energy." The dish that emerged from Kira's efforts was visually stunning but unpretentious, presenting familiar comfort food elevated through flawless technique and artistic plating. Elena tasted a small portion and nearly wept at the complexity of flavors and emotions it evoked. "This is extraordinary," she whispered. Tommy delivered the dish to Webb's table while Elena and Kira watched nervously through the kitchen service window. The critic's first bite brought a visible change to his expression. Surprise, then thoughtfulness, then something approaching wonder. "He's smiling," Tommy reported quietly. "I don't think I've ever seen Marcus Webb smile while eating." The evening continued successfully, with other diners commenting on the exceptional quality of their meals. Webb finished every bite of his dish and requested to speak with the chef, which usually meant either high praise or serious complaints. "Ms. Vasquez," he said when Elena approached his table, "that was remarkable. I've been reviewing restaurants for 15 years, and I've never tasted anything quite like that braised short rib. The technical execution was flawless, but more than that, it felt healing, somehow. Like it addressed needs I didn't know I had." "Thank you," Elena replied carefully. "We take pride in understanding our customers' preferences." "I'd like to schedule a full review dinner next week," Webb continued. "And I'd appreciate meeting whoever cooked tonight's special. That kind of intuitive cooking deserves recognition." Elena's heart sank. Having Kira publicly identified as the restaurant's secret weapon would inevitably lead to questions about her legal status, her species, her refugee background. The positive review they desperately needed could become a liability that destroyed everything they'd built. "I'll see if that's possible," she said diplomatically. After Webb left, Elena found Kira cleaning her station with the methodical precision that marked all her work. "We have a problem," Elena said quietly. "The critic wants to meet me," Kira guessed. "How did you know?" I could sense his curiosity building throughout the meal. He recognized that tonight's dish was prepared differently than usual. Kira set down her cleaning cloth and faced Elena directly. You are concerned about my legal status. Elena nodded reluctantly. I should have applied for proper work permits before hiring you, but the paperwork takes months and you needed work immediately. If the authorities discover I'm employing an undocumented alien, you could lose your restaurant, Kira finished. And face criminal charges. I won't let that happen, Elena said firmly. We'll figure something out. But their planning was interrupted by the arrival of two colonial immigration officers, their official badges gleaming under the restaurant's warm lighting. Elena's stomach dropped as she realized their worst fears were materializing. Elena Vasquez, the lead officer, inquired. We need to speak with you about your employment practices. Behind him, Frank Hendricks from the market stood with obvious satisfaction. Told you she was hiding something, he said smugly. Running a restaurant with illegal alien labor. I operate in full compliance with colonial regulations, Elena replied, though they all knew it wasn't true. We'll need to see employment records for all your staff, the officer continued, and documentation proving legal work status for any non-human employees. Kira stepped forward before Elena could respond. Officers, I am the employee in question. Chef Vasquez was not aware of my documentation status when she hired me. If there are legal violations, they are mine alone. That's not how it works, the second officer said, pulling out a scanner to record Kira's biometrics. Employers are responsible for verifying work authorization. As they processed Kira's information, Elena felt 3 weeks of hope and progress crumbling around them. The partnership that had revitalized her restaurant and given Kira a chance at dignity was about to be destroyed by bureaucratic regulations and one man's petty spite. Ma'am, you'll need to come with us for processing, the lead officer told Kira. And Ms. Vasquez, you'll be receiving a formal citation for employment violations. Elena watched helplessly as they prepared to take Kira away, knowing that once she entered the immigration system, the chances of seeing her again were virtually zero. The refugee processing centers were overwhelmed and understaffed, designed more to warehouse people than to help them build productive lives. Wait, Elena said desperately. There has to be something we can do. She's not a criminal, she's a skilled worker who contributes to this community. That's for the immigration courts to determine, the officer replied with bureaucratic finality. As they led Kira toward the exit, Elena felt like she was watching the destruction of everything they'd accomplished together. The restaurant would survive, but it would never be the same without Kira's unique talents and perspective. But Kira paused at the doorway, her enhanced senses detecting something that the humans had missed entirely. Officers, she said quietly, I believe there may be a public health issue that requires your immediate attention. The immigration officers paused at Kira's words, their professional skepticism warring with the serious implications of ignoring a potential health crisis. What kind of public health issue? The lead officer asked. Kira's crystalline skin patterns flickered with the nervous energy that indicated she was processing complex sensory information. I have been detecting contamination signatures from several establishments in this district for the past week. Bacterial growth patterns that suggest improper food storage and preparation practices. You can detect that by smell, the second officer asked incredulously. Ilari have significantly more sensitive chemical receptors than humans, Kira explained. What you might notice as slightly off food, I can identify as specific pathogens with dangerous concentration levels. Frank Hendricks stepped forward with obvious annoyance. This is just a desperate attempt to avoid deportation. You can't believe anything these aliens say. But Kira was already moving toward the restaurant's communication terminal. Officer, may I contact the Colonial Health Authority? I believe we have less than 12 hours before several hundred people become seriously ill. The lead officer looked torn between procedure and potential catastrophe. What exactly are you claiming to have detected? Salmonella contamination at the Golden Dragon restaurant, probably from improper poultry storage. Listeria at Franco's Deli, likely from contaminated dairy products. And something I cannot identify, but that smells like industrial solvent at the Cosmic Cafe, possibly deliberate food tampering. Elena stared at Kira in amazement. She had noticed her friend's occasional comments about unusual odors from other establishments, but hadn't realized the implications of what Kira's enhanced senses were detecting. "Those are serious accusations," the officer said slowly. "They are observations based on chemical analysis that human senses cannot perform," Kira corrected. "I am not making accusations, I am reporting potential public health hazards that require professional investigation." The officer made a decision that would change everything. Instead of continuing with Kira's deportation, he contacted the Colonial Health Authority and requested emergency food safety inspections at the establishments Kira had identified. Within hours, the results confirmed her warnings with terrifying accuracy. The Golden Dragon was shut down immediately after inspectors found salmonella contamination that could have hospitalized hundreds of customers. Franco's Deli was closed pending investigation of listeria-contaminated cheese that had already sickened 12 people. Most shocking of all, the Cosmic Cafe was revealed to be deliberately adulterating their food with industrial cleaning compounds to mask the taste of spoiled ingredients. A scheme that could have caused mass poisoning. How many lives did she just save? Elena asked the health inspector who came to interview Kira about her detection methods. Conservative estimate. At least 200 people from serious illness, possibly several dozen from death, Dr. Patricia Kim replied, making notes on her data pad. Ms. Kira's early detection prevented what could have been the worst food safety disaster in New Terra's history. The immigration officers found themselves in an unprecedented situation. The alien they had come to deport was now being hailed as a public health hero by the Colonial Health Authority, the mayor's office, and half the planet's news organizations. "This is highly irregular," the lead officer admitted to Elena while they waited for instructions from his superiors. "We've never had a deportation case involving someone who just prevented a public health catastrophe." "Maybe that's because you've never had someone with Kira's abilities available to help," Elena suggested. "How many other potential disasters go undetected because humans simply can't sense the early warning signs?" The question resonated beyond just Kira's individual case. Within days, the Colonial Health Authority was requesting permission to establish a special consulting program that would utilize alien refugees' unique sensory abilities for early detection of food safety issues. Dr. Kim personally petitioned the Immigration Department for emergency citizenship status for Kira, citing her irreplaceable value to public safety. "It's not just about detecting contamination," Dr. Kim explained to the review board. "Ms. Kira has demonstrated an understanding of food safety that goes beyond anything our current human staff can achieve. She represents a resource that could revolutionize how we approach public health monitoring." Frank Hendricks, meanwhile, found his own business under intense scrutiny after investigators discovered he had been systematically bribing health inspectors to overlook violations in his produce operation. His attempt to destroy Kira's new life had ultimately led to his own downfall. "Karma," Tommy observed with satisfaction as they watched news reports of Hendricks being led away in restraints. "Sometimes the universe has a sense of justice after all." The legal resolution came faster than anyone expected. The colonial government granted Kira emergency citizenship and offered her a position with the health authority, recognizing that her unique abilities made her invaluable to community safety. But Kira politely declined the government job. "I appreciate the honor," she told Dr. Kim, "but I have found my calling in Chef Elena's kitchen. Food safety is important, but creating meals that heal and comfort people is equally valuable service." Instead, they worked out a compromise. Kira would continue working at Stellar Fusion while serving as a consultant for the health authority, providing early warning detection for potential foodborne illness outbreaks. It was the first position of its kind in the colonial territories, creating a new model for integrating refugee skills into community services. The publicity surrounding Kira's heroic actions transformed Stellar Fusion from a neighborhood restaurant into a sector-wide destination. But Elena was careful to manage their growth thoughtfully, expanding their staff to include other refugees and immigrants who brought diverse culinary traditions and skills. "We're not just serving food anymore," Elena reflected as she watched Kira training a new Centauri prep cook in proper knife techniques. "We're proving that diversity makes communities stronger, not weaker." 6 months after their first meeting at the market, Kira and Elena celebrated the grand opening of Stellar Fusion's expanded facility. A combined restaurant, culinary training center, and refugee employment program. The ribbon-cutting ceremony drew representatives from across the sector, including several government officials who had initially opposed refugee integration programs. When I first met Kira, Elena addressed the gathered crowd. She was searching for scraps behind a produce stand. "Today, she's a citizen, a consultant to our health department, and one of the finest chefs I've ever had the privilege to work with." That transformation didn't happen because of charity or pity. It happened because someone was willing to see potential where others saw only problems. Kira stood beside her, her crystalline skin patterns now glowing with health and confidence. "Chef Elena offered me more than a job," she said in response. "She offered me dignity, partnership, and the chance to contribute my skills to a community that has become my home." The evening celebration featured dishes that represented the culinary traditions of a dozen different species, all prepared by refugee and immigrant cooks who had found new purpose in Elena and Kira's kitchen. It was fusion cuisine in the truest sense, not just mixing ingredients, but blending cultures, experiences, and hopes into something entirely new. As the last guests departed and they cleaned up from the celebration, Elena found herself marveling at how much had changed since that day in the market. Her simple act of offering soup to a hungry stranger had grown into something that touched hundreds of lives and changed how their entire community thought about diversity and inclusion. "Any regrets?" she asked Kira as they finished closing procedures. "Only one," Kira replied with a smile. "I regret that it took me so long to find a place where my skills could truly make a difference." "And I regret that I almost walked past you in that market," Elena admitted. "Imagine what we would have missed." Outside, New Terra's evening light sparkled like distant stars, illuminating a community that was stronger, safer, and more compassionate than it had been just months earlier. It was proof that sometimes the most powerful changes begin not with grand gestures or political movements, but with one person deciding to treat another with basic human dignity and respect. In their kitchen, surrounded by the tools of their trade and the lingering aromas of the evening celebration, Elena and Kira planned their next day's menu, continuing their quiet revolution one meal at a time.